This is Market Ready, a brand new podcast about how companies bring products to market. On this season, we go behind the scenes and give you an in-depth look at the world of product marketing and answer questions like,
what is product marketing?
What are the core skills you need to be a product marketer?
How is product marketing different at large and small companies?
And so much more. But before we dive in, on this episode, we are going to discuss how to build credibility with product managers. This was an interesting conversation because it evolved into discussing how to manage and resolve conflict with product managers and what happens when you can't. Stay tuned to see how we've handled those situations in the past. Also, I want to note, this episode was recorded before we moved to remote work full time. While some of our tips are about grabbing coffee and having FaceTime, we still want to underscore it's important to have non-work related meetings with your counterparts. Finally, you will hear, I am struggling with losing my voice the entire episode, but hopefully you'll find it enjoyable anyway. And now, on to our show. All right, Miyishia, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so we touched on this last week in the episode right before this one, and we really touched on influencing the product roadmap, some key folks you're going to be working with, and one of those we identified was product management. They are your number one person right by your side that you're going to be working with primarily as a product marketing manager. I think as a product marketer, one of the biggest things that you could bring to help influence the product roadmap is being the voice of the customer. And so really making sure that you have customer data points and verbatims to help prove a point or just back up things that are going on. Especially if there are particular features that we may want to, that you at your company may want to push up in the roadmap, because there are some monetary value to that, or just customer sentiment, or even just getting you to market parity. Sometimes it's just the industry that you're in and the competitive landscape, making sure that you have those insights to help influence the product roadmap.
I would say if you can get your product manager sitting down, with your actual customer, if you can connect them, that is ideal. Because hearing it from the customer, I think, will carry more weight than even hearing it from you.
I agree. I think when you are setting up these customer reviews or surveys, that product should be in the room to actually hear verbatim. It definitely changes the mindset, and they can also pick up things. Sometimes they'll even explain things to a customer, but also be there to listen as well.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, something that I have seen done at this job and that we do is really try to have a customer advisory board. I don't know if you guys have ever done those. One of the benefits of participating in the customer advisory board is really getting that direct kind of one-on-one time with our product managers, getting a preview of the roadmap early, being able to weigh in. We survey them that they're like our first kind of point of contact with the outside. Maybe they're going to be our alpha customers as we talked about our phases for launch. So really identifying who are your product evangelists as far as customers and really starting to get them onboarded in programs that'll help them interface with product management early and often, I think is really key. What else?
Yes. I think another thing to your point about knowing the product is making sure that you're leveraging that relationship that you're building with them and that one-on-one time. Typically, a product roadmap is developed very early on during the year. So whatever part of whatever planning process you do, some companies do that planning process quarterly. Some people do that bi-yearly. And some people just do it annually and have quarterly check-ins. So you need to understand when is your product team actually building out a lot of these core features in terms of determining what's going to be on the product roadmap, and make sure that you're able, we talked a little bit about this last week, having a seat at that table, and if you can't get a seat, having that folding chair.
Yeah.
and some ways to kind of break into that particular session. But be aware of when a lot of these planning sessions are happening, so that way you can influence that. And if you're not able to do it, I do want to caveat that by saying that if you're not able to meet that yearly product roadmap, one that's set out, again, try to be a part of those quarterly check-ins that could happen. And if you're leading, in particular, a good cause or has some really good customer feedback, that you're just really, the customer voice is very clear on what's next. And those are really beneficial and useful to your product and engineering teams.
Yeah. And I would say, we probably need to start at good old relationship building.
Yes.
I think it comes back to building a relationship, whether this is with your boss, whether it's with a customer, whether it's with an internal stakeholder. I think it's important to know what is important to your product manager. What are their goals? How are they incentivized? What's most pressing on their mind so that you can talk to them in their language?
That I agree with. I think one of the things I have done in the past year or so is I actually took a product management course just to get a general sense of what the role does. And I think that really helped me in terms of understanding their role and being able to talk their talk in their language of what's important. And also making sure that you do level set with them in terms of, what terminology is being used, and that you understand some of those, at the bare minimum, a little bit of the technical components that might go behind that as well.
I think another thing that's important is, understanding how do they operate? Is it waterfall? Is it agile? Is it a bit of a mix? Because understanding how they develop, I think building a product marketing plan is actually very different, whether it's waterfall or agile. I think agile becomes a little bit more difficult to plan for. They're constantly releasing updates. So I think you have to be more creative about how you're going to package them up and your timing of release.
Right.
And I don't know about you, I found it a little bit more difficult. Now, I would just love to put the PSA out there. A lot of people claim agile and don't actually do agile. But in real agile, you might have releases every day to every other day. So it's even harder to really stay on top of that. But understanding how do they develop, understanding what is called LOEs, or level of effort for engineering. Because if you're going to really be seen as a thought partner, I think understanding how long things take so that you can be collaborative in problem solving, how you can group together things to fit into a sprint, understanding how sprints are designed, and really understanding how they work and what's important to them so that you can be seen as an added benefit versus maybe somebody who's asking for something that's not realistic or somehow like a roadblock to what they're trying to do.
I agree. And I think I'll just add on top of that you also, as a thought partner to product and engineering, you want to be able to sift kind of through that. If you're in an agile working environment where there's constant updates coming along, product marketer need to be able to understand, okay, which ones are like our tier one, like these are the ones that we're going to make the biggest noise about, throughout the year at certain points. Which ones are tier two, where it's like, it's not going to get as much level of supporting, but we will do at least like a blog post or send out an email. And then what's kind of like a tier three, like, we may not, really talk about this. We're just going to allow this to go out by itself. So as that thought partner, you need to also be thinking through what those features are, what's the business objective and goal of that, how that's going to affect your customers, and understanding like what you should be making a big marketing noise about and which ones, you probably don't need to.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think it's discussing that early because, one of the things we're going to talk about coming up soon is about conflict management. And I think one place where conflict can arise is not having agreement. If you think something is really a small or medium-sized launch or something that's not really supported, and your product manager, your engineering team thinks that it's a big deal and they're expecting a big splash and fanfare, that's one of the places where I think it can get really tough with your relationship. What about other places where you have potential conflict with product managers?
I would say probably another area I've seen this is just in terms of ownership,
in
terms of who owns what. And especially when it comes to customer-facing material. So, for example, in product notifications, pop-ups, onboarding experiences, in my past, I have, there's been a little bit of conflict of who owns the copy there, who owns the flow between marketing and product and what that means. And so I think just getting very clear about who owns what and where within the product, outside of the product. So just really being clear on ownership and responsibilities.
Yeah, I think that is a good point, and I think it's different at different places. We've alluded to this in the past. Sometimes product marketers really own the go-to-market, but I have seen product managers who are GM. I think that's a really good place. I would say launch date. If I had to pick one area where there is like the biggest source of conflict between product marketing and product management, I often find it's launch date. They may want time, or they may not think it's a hard deadline, or they may not see the importance of releasing something around an event and is really focused on trying to get it right. And by all means, that's their job. But understanding that market conditions are really trying to get them on your schedule, if there is especially a public-facing deadline, I think is really important.
Or the flip side of that, which we alluded to last week, where it's just like product did not come to you and they're wanting to release something and want you to market it like the next day.
Yeah.
When a release is there. So it can go either way. But that's also where conflict arises, where, you may not have such a strong partnership between product and marketing, and they are releasing things without providing that insight to marketing. And so like when things are released, there's, marketing is not prepared to support a particular launch because not having that insight of what's going on.
Yeah. Any other places? So, we kind of have around release date, we have around ownership. Are there any other places where you tend to have, conflict with product management?
I would say two areas. One is just in terms of what we talked about, influence the product roadmap and having those customer insights and being the voice of the customer. Oftentimes, especially if a product and engineering team has spent a great deal amount of time working on a particular feature, and you come in and you say, hey, this needs to change. Yeah. And they are, just so ingrained in that particular way, and the feature, and, the customer data is just showing we need to change. That's where conflict has also arisen in terms of, they may not want to change it because they felt like they know the product best and what's going to be best for customers. Yeah. Whereas the customer data is telling us something else. And so how do you have that conversation by letting them know that their contributions are appreciated, but we're not here to just build, we're not only here just to build things that we want to build, but we have an obligation to our customer to build what's best for them as well. So that's some areas that I've seen conflict arise. And then I would say the other area is just personality. Yeah. So just personality clashes that can happen during just any conflict manager, and that's across the board. Yeah. But sometimes that does happen between, usually it's over one of the things that we've mentioned before, over ownership or just like conflict in the terms of the direction that we should be going in. But sometimes that happens as well.
I feel like I also would add to the list about talking to engineering directly. Like, a feeling like I'm almost trying to cut them out. And I have seen a lot of people just not being comfortable with you talking to engineering. And so that's one of the places, especially at a small company, because it's like, engineering, right? Like, you may eat lunch with these people or go to coffee or happy hour. So it's like a little weird to be working on something and not talk to them. Right. But just having, again, a fear that maybe you're going to change that roadmap by going directly to engineering. I have also, had conflict arise. Right. So let's talk about, how do we deal with the conflict? Like, I just don't want to name kind of some of the areas. Obviously it's important for people to know that they're not alone, but how do you start handling some of the conflict? And I think, you brought up a really good example of like ownership. So why don't we tackle that one?
Yeah. So I will talk very broadly to protect names of companies. But when I ran into this in a past in a past role, I actually had to level it, escalate the path to not only to our managers, but to our directors, and actually get a mandate from the C-suite of what the marketing org handles versus what the product org handles. And that's what we kind of use to ground our conversation. And I had to create a whole presentation about, here's what I see that marketing handles versus what product handles. Here's how we come together. And here are some of our key stakeholders within that, and have that conversation. And so I think in that terms, when it comes to roles and responsibilities, sometimes it's easier to escalate and to kind of follow what is the top-down directive of what marketing handles versus what product handles, and use that and then gauge that around your particular project as well. That's what worked for me in the past.
That is great, because I am going to take the absolute opposite approach, because as somebody who spent a lot of my career at startups, one of the things our leaders love organizations to be flat. Yes. They typically don't like hierarchy, so they typically don't want to get in it. Escalation is a little bit of a bad word, and so it's like, you guys handle it yourself. So I would say I actually take a very human approach, right? Take people out of the office, go to coffee, go to dinner, get to know them personally, because it's really hard for somebody to stonewall you when they get to know you, and you take a personal interest when you're asking about their kids or their dog, or it's really hard for them to turn around and be really mean and cold in a professional setting. So I kind of take the opposite approach. My mom always used to have this saying, kill people with kindness. So whenever I get stonewalled, I tend to go in the opposite direction, where it's I'm going to be your work BFF, and I'm going to understand the things you like, and buy you that coffee or that wine that you like, and really kind of soften you, because most of the time when people kind of see you as a friend, it's really hard to be no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not. No. So that's the way that I handle it, is almost get personal and really get to know them and try to have a functional working relationship. And usually if you can align your goals with their goals, people kind of ease up a little bit. And if you have to get their boss involved, then obviously have to. But I usually do it in the same way, more of a casual approach, and I try not to escalate, or even giving somebody a warning. Even recently, it was not a product manager, but I had a situation where I was this person's blocking me. I'm not sure that they understand that they're blocking me. So I was can we have a sidebar before I just have to tell the whole project team, you are the person blocking me? And it actually went really well. This particular person was oh, I'll take ownership, and I'll go to my boss, and I'll get clearer priorities. So that has been really successful for me. I think the next thing that I think is a big thing is kind of changing that product roadmap that you alluded to. Yeah. And so I want to talk about, how do we get past changing that product roadmap?
One thing I want to say is you shouldn't just show up to the product roadmap meeting and just be here's the customer feedback.
I'm changing the roadmap.
I'm changing everything. You cannot do that. Do not walk in and do that. I would say have an idea of a couple of things that you may want to get bumped up. And I think I touched on this last week, that a product roadmap has it's kind of a negotiation process, but as a part of it, when you say let's bump up this particular feature, making sure that we build this out or prioritize this, that means there is there's a balance of what's bumping off that roadmap. Yeah. So again, it's a balance of not only new features, but also updates to existing features that customers may want, and outside of just overall fixes and overall maintenance. So just know that when you come in there, have a game plan of maybe 1 to 2 things that you may want bumped up or bumped down, or feel really strongly about, or it has a business, really tie it to a business goal, a larger business goal, and that it's going to help us get X amount of new customers or retain X amount of our existing customers. We're going to see X amount of, revenue expected from this as well. Yeah. So it's not just about being the voice of customer and that's it, of their complaints. It's about having a real business need for wanting a particular feature to get bumped up, within the process as well.
Yeah, this is another one where I say it's really important to put product in connection with the customer. Because I think, again, hearing it from customers, it's really hard to stonewall. When you kind of, get them to spend a day with them or get on a video call or record feedback, hearing it from the customer directly and not hearing from you, all of a sudden it feels more real and more grounded. And I don't think you should be offended by that, but I do think it's just a fact,
Yes.
And so I think when you, can get them in interfacing with customers, it often helps a lot more with changing the product roadmap. I would also say this is where it's really important, going back to the GTM show, talking about what are your phases to launch. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so rigorous about my GTM process and what does alpha mean? What does beta mean? And what are success criteria for moving phases? Because that way you have early on created an objective standard for moving phases. And then it becomes less on you. It's like, hey, we agreed if we did not get X percentage of usability for this feature, we weren't moving on.
Right.
We agreed if we weren't getting X amount of customers or X amount of adoption, or if it wasn't functioning to this percent, we weren't moving on. So it's not me trying to change the roadmap. It's like we agreed to these metrics. And so now there's an objective standard for why we need to delay. And I would also say this is where it's important, what I said at the beginning of the episode of understanding level of effort and when you ask for a change, what else is this impacting? And I think it's really important to have empathy here because you can understand any person who's working. If you're working on something and somebody's asking for a last minute change, how would you feel? So also have empathy for your product managers. I do think it is a tough job and they're also in a very cross-functional role where they're influencing without authority, and engineering may want a whole other different set of things. Mm-hmm. So they are constantly negotiating between us and engineering. And so this is something where if you're going to ask for a change, have a clear priority.
Definite business objective.
Yeah, know what the level of effort and kind of be flexible on timing. It's not only important to have empathy for your product manager, but it's also important to have empathy for your customers. Today, we are going to do a quick product spotlight on the conversation intelligence platform, Chorus. Chorus is a tool that enables you to record, transcribe, and analyze your calls in real time. This is an extremely valuable way to gather customer insights and share them with relevant stakeholders. As a marketer, you can use Chorus to quickly scale your understanding of customer pain points, use cases, and understand how your marketing messages resonate. Chorus has a number of integrations, including Zoom, Google Meet, Join Me, BlueJeans, and many, many more. We sincerely hope you will try Chorus or other conversational tools to help you gather customer insights. And now, back to our show. Are there any other key ones around conflict that you want to address and kind of give us some tips on?
I would say as much as possible, make sure you're utilizing that those one-on-one time with your product manager. If you don't have a weekly one-on-one with your product manager, please have one. And also spend some time with them, sit in their area. Even if you don't, if product and marketing sit on different floors or different units, spend at least once a week or every couple of weeks with them as well to really get close and have that time with FaceTime with your engineering team as well. I think that's really helpful in terms of building that relationship as well. Because you guys are so closely aligned, when there is conflict, people can see it.
Yeah.
And it affects a lot of the project timelines that are there. So as much as possible, utilize different types of conflict management styles. So whether that's talking about your different personality styles, your communication styles, whether that is having a heart-to-heart or just going out for drinks or lunch together and being really honest with each other. I think it's important. And I will say I have been in situations where I've had where I did have a conflict with my
Yeah.
PM, and they actually did not want to resolve our conflict.
Yeah. I've had people request other people on my team.
Right.
To
where, we basically really couldn't work together because instead of coming to me when there was an issue, she would try to go to my boss, and my boss would say, well, have you talked to her? And she'd say no.
Yeah.
And it was just like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, you guys need to work this out. And then when I went to her, to this particular PM, she basically said she didn't really want to work with me.
Yeah.
And so I want us to also caveat to say that, yes, you can use conflict management tools.
Yeah.
And for the most part, most of your PM team is going to want to work together. But there are situations where that just does not work out. And you utilize your HR managers and everything else to find a best solution so that the work still gets done.
Yeah. And, maybe there is an opportunity in that. I had a situation where I was the team lead and I was the product marketing team lead, and somebody wanted to request somebody on my team to have me taken off of the work. And it was mainly because I think, he viewed this woman on my team as a particular pushover. So where I would give pushback and saying, like, are we doing the right things? Or, I want this and I'm staunch about this in this release. I think he saw her more as, what is often called an order taker. And at some point I just reshuffled the work and I did get off it. If we're not going to have a harmonious relationship, sometimes it's not the worst thing in the world to kind of reshuffle the deck. If you have had, tried the conflict resolution tools and you've had to escalate and all of those kind of things, that is really going to waste time.
Yes.
And so at some point I do think you have to know when to call it and figure out what other, parts of work or projects or products, may be interesting or beneficial to you to work on if the relationship really isn't there.
Yes.
So why don't we move on to talking about how do you educate the product team about marketing?
Yeah, so this is a good one. And I primarily see this with especially younger PMs who, this is kind of like their first year or two or a couple of years within there, who may not have that much experience. But I think just overall, it's really great to give your product management team insight on what marketing actually does. So as a product marketer, essentially, yes, you are the spokesperson for that side, but product team does not usually see all the other marketers that you work with.
Yeah.
So they're not going to work with like the brand marketing team. They're not going to work with the email marketing team, or if you have a customer marketing team. So they don't have exposure to all those different teams that you may have to work with in order to launch a particular campaign. And so you're kind of the spokesperson for that, who has to let them know, like, hey, if we're going to use these resources, I have to get their time. And that takes about a minimum 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And so that means I need X ready by this date. And so that's one of the things about educating them, just about the internal process of what it takes to actually launch a campaign, that, it's not just as easy as like, hey, we need to launch this today, do your marketing magic and send out an email and post it on social media, and that's it.
Right.
And so I think part of it, one of the things I like to do, especially with a new PM working relationship, is explain my role, what I'm responsible for, and really explain our organization in terms of like who I'm working with and who those other folks that I may be working with as well.
Yeah, and I think it's best to do it up front. I hear a lot of departments, not just marketing. I spend a lot of time with our legal privacy team and, finance team. And, in particular here, we have a great learning and development program. And so people will call, just like create a lunch and learn, or put what their department does as part of the onboarding training or something like that. And so find really creative and subtle ways to start educating. But I would say, a best thing to do is when you start a new project team or, you get on a new product, that is the time to kind of come in and level set. And again, we call back to the GTM show a lot, but I do think that there was a lot of great meaty content in there where one of the things I said is really get alignment on your go-to-market plan. Like that is the opportunity to say, this is the way I work. This is how I run the plan. These are the metrics I'm looking for. These are the things I'm going to look at. And if you guys don't like the way I approach this, now's the time for us to talk and get alignment. So I think that that's a good opportunity to educate. And I would also say, find milestones. If you are doing a phased approach versus alpha to beta, or if you are doing a time approach, which is, checking in monthly or checking in quarterly, find the times to actually give the team an update so they actually know how much work went into it, how many metrics go into it, that this is really a strategic process. It's not random. And I find it so funny in my 10th year, more and more when I talk about what I do, people do think it's like, oh, I see a social media post and it's easy, right? And I'm like, oh, audience segmentation and how we segment creatives for this audience and how we segment messaging and how we test this. And like the more I get into the nuance, people are like, oh my gosh, your job is so complicated. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. Anybody just doesn't do this. I know we make it look easy, but that is actually part of our job, is to make it look and sound easy. Exactly. But it is a very complex, a little bit of a scientific thing that we do. And so I think if you have the opportunity to educate them early and often, then it's good. Any other tips for educating them?
Yeah, I kind of, that's a good point. I also equate it to oftentimes as product managers, they are allocating engineering time. So they have to allocate, it's going to take this amount of engineering resources and this amount of many hours in order to complete a particular new feature or launch. And so I do the same thing on the other side. Like, you said it's going to take 2.5 of your engineers, like at least 2 engineers and, 20 hours of their time.
Right.
And so I equate it to that, like, so I'm going to need to work with 3 different marketers and ask for allocate this amount of time for them to do it. And I'm very clear about those timelines early on. And so just equate it to as you do resourcing on your side, I have to do resourcing on my side for the right marketing resources in order to build this out as well. So it's like we're building together, and that's how I relate it.
That is an amazing tip. I have never done that in 10 years of being a product marketer, but that is like an amazing tip. And I am totally going to use that to think about it in the way of resourcing and kind of speaking their language. And I think, again, whatever communication tools, I think right now what's really popular is crucial conversations and, radical candor is some of, the trending ways about how you talk honestly and vulnerably in the workplace, but getting on the same page. I never thought about equating those kind of resources so they really do see the organizational impact. Brilliant. What about questions? Any other tips before we move into questions?
I think those are the top ones.
Yeah. So the question that I've selected out of the bunch today is not directly about product, but it is talking about, how do you land a PMM role if you don't quite have experience? And one of the reasons why I wanted to put it with this show is because I do think it can feel strange to be a new product marketer and be interfacing with product, and you don't necessarily have that confidence to rely on. You may not have that experience or that expertise for other places. So what are some of the ways that you would recommend how people can land the job despite not having experience?
Yeah. So I'll even take this and flip this a little bit more. So I'm glad we actually included this on here because I've actually seen a number of different product managers switch to become a product marketing manager.
I am one. I did it.
So I think this is a really great question to talk about how often that switch happens between when you are a product manager coming over to be a product marketing manager and what that relates to. And so I will say that given that, product managers don't necessarily have marketing experience,
right,
but what they do have and should have and what they're bringing to the table is a good understanding of how the product works, how to build it, that engineering side. And to your point, Jeanette, if they have been working in more of a general manager sense, they typically have a very good overlay of not just the product and engineering side, but the business aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
And so And if they've been working very closely with their product marketing managers and have that good relationship, they've gotten some insight along the way of what it takes to actually build a go-to-market plan, execute on that go-to-market plan, and do the implementation monitoring post-launch, and have been working with them too. And so I think that with the when you don't have product marketing manager experience, there's a lot of transferable skills that could relate into this because, as I said before, product marketing manager is like a CMO of the product.
Right.
So you do need to have that general overlay of not only just marketing, but that business aspect and really understanding the product and engineering side as well. And so I think there's a lot of transferable skills that you could tap into what it takes to be a product marketing manager without that title.
Yeah, I thought you brought up two good points. One, a little bit different from the question, but I do find I work best with product managers who have been product marketers, even if they didn't like it. And I have empathy because I have been on the other side of I was a product marketer first, dipped my toe into product management because I thought, they had the power, they had the control. Didn't like it. I just personally did not like writing requirements and I found it boring. So I stepped back across the line, but I do kind of having that understanding of writing requirements and user flows and user testing and how do you manage engineering, have a lot of empathy. So I do think it comes back to having some empathy. But then how to land the job. I just think you have to land on your, rely on your strengths. And I say this about any kind of career transition to be fully transparent. I was a civil engineer before I got into tech marketing. So I made a very significant transition. I think with any transition, you have to find what is that core skill that's really going to carry you. Are you a really stellar project manager? Are you a marketer of a different kind where you're really strong at content? Are you a consumer insights or research person, right? Like you're going to have one of these myriad of skills that you do well. Hopefully, if not, you're going to work and focus on bolstering one. And then you're going to use that as your strong point and you're going to figure out whether it's hiring for the team or contractors or outsourcing or supplementing or using from other people. How are you going to start to build the other skills you need? But I think just find one core skill and start to lean on that and then start to branch out from there. And there's, a lot of great research online. One of the people that I follow for career coaching is Marcus Buckingham, and he talks about how you can learn and strengthen your weaknesses through how you learn with your strengths. And so, for example, for me, because I was an engineer, my strengths is really quantitative. I like the go-to-market. I like the number crunching. I like all the data. That's where I'm really comfortable. I'm not really comfortable with writing a lot of content, but that becomes a big part of the job. And I was doing a talk a couple of weeks ago about career transitions. And one of the things I said is because I'm an engineer, I like patterns and I like numbers. Yes. So when I have to write something, I often go and search for inspiration of something that I think that is well written. And then I start to dissect it. Like the first sentence is about XYZ and the second sentence is about this. So like the first sentence is an intro and the second sentence is about value props. And then you close with this. And so I almost create myself an outline. And then it's like I create like a paint by numbers outline to do writing. And so I take my strengths, which is like synthesizing information and seeing patterns. And then I dissect that pattern and I use it to bolster my weaknesses. So thinking about, how you can take something that you're really strong in and use that to kind of get over the hump and the anxiety of other things.
Yes. And I will say too, as you're going through the interview process for a PMM role, hiring managers are looking for particular skill sets. So they are looking for that collaborative piece. And I think if you can pull out some really great stories around things that you've led, so like as Jeanette said, speaking to your strengths, but especially like anything around where you drove, like used insights, actioned on it, and then reviewed that with metrics and saw how well it performed or didn't perform and what you did post that. So really seeing how you drove something from start to finish is something that's really focused on in the hiring process and having really good examples of that. Just some soft skills, as we've talked about in earlier episodes, around being very collaborative, having that data side and that aspect and understanding the numbers is really important. And then I would say the last part is just like being a learner. So I want to say, like, as a product marketing manager, you are solving some really tough problems, especially if you're working on something that has not been done before.
Yeah.
And so just having that mental flexibility to come in and want to solve problems, be a learner every day and help figure it out is just a really great strength to have. Even if you don't necessarily have product marketing manager as your specific job title.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great tip, and I think that's a great place to close.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been episode 6 of Market Ready. Tune in next time.
Thank you.
This show was produced by the Market Ready team. Sound mixed and edited by Full Spectrum Productions, with original music from Damani Rhodes. Thank you again for listening, and feel free to connect with us at Market Ready Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn.